guys, this is Joseph with this week's soundbite. Okay, this week I want to talk to you about a very important concept called edge computing. Now, most of us think about edge computing and we tend to dive into the technology aspect, but I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about what should you be thinking about as a business leader around the technology side of edge compute, but then also what should you be thinking about from a business leader standpoint when you think about the business impact of edge compute. All right, so let's start with the technology. What is edge compute? So the best way to think about it is almost to think about what it is not. So cloud computing, if you think about when you have an application on your phone, that application on your phone, or most applications, goes on ahead, gathers information from you locally, where you are, what's happening, and then takes all that data and ships it to the cloud. And based on what's happening in there, it takes the cloud looks at that data, makes up some information, says, let me add some analytics, let me do something, and sends something back to you in order to make a decision. So you can think about GPS is a great example, right? It's gonna take where your car is, it's taking all the information back up to the cloud, and it's determining where you should go next. Well, what happens though if I'm in an autonomous vehicle? And this autonomous vehicle is moving along and it needs to decide whether or not it should stop at a stop sign. If an autonomous vehicle is going 20 to 25 miles an hour, let's say in a residential or a busy area, you don't want to see that little hourglass start spinning and it trying to figure out, oh my God, what am I going to do next? Am I still, I can't connect to the cloud, I can't connect to the internet. Do I stop, do I go? Do I stop, do I go? You don't want that happening. In other words, you want that autonomous vehicle to make that decision locally. You want to make it without going to the cloud. You want to make it within its local environment. That is edge compute. The ability for that piece of technology to make a decision, to analyze data, to filter data, to normalize information, and be able to make a decision locally without necessarily having to go to the cloud. So computing happens locally. Okay, so here's the thing. When you think about edge compute from a technology perspective, typically people will talk about the use cases that are involving human life, where it's critically important that we make decisions right then and there. And there are more and more of these use cases evolving. Common use case that we already talked about is, of course, autonomous vehicles. Another one could be citizens walking across the road, right? You want to be able to alert a vehicle in that time that a citizen is in a crosswalk or is maybe crossing a part of the street they shouldn't be. All of those types of cases that require millisecond decisions, safety, moving at speed, anything like that requires a good use cases for edge compute. The second thing though that is often missed or can be missed as to why you want to consider edge compute from a technology perspective is the backhaul cost. So if I'm having to look at a particular video, let's say I'm in an area where maybe it's a farming area or I'm in a mine where I'm capturing video, but I'm capturing that video locally and something happens, there's an event that happens, I can't afford to take all of that video and send it back via cellular all the way back to my data center. Be very, very costly. So what edge compute can be used for is a great way to filter the data, filter that information, so that I only will send back data or video when an event happens. So if I have the ability to do computing power, that means to apply logic and apply rules at the edge. When I say at the edge, we're talking about on a router or a switch, anything that is as close to that device as possible, typically that first connection to that device. If I have computing power there and I can apply rules, then I can save myself quite a bit of money in terms of thinking about backhaul traffic, right? So, big reason, a lot of people talk about edge computing in terms of, again, the need to save lives, split the second decision making, on the cost side to save backhaul costs, especially with cellular. But here's the one that most people miss that I think is the most transformative of the reasons from a technology perspective you should be thinking about edge computing. Okay, In the world that we live in, insight is a currency of the 21st century, meaning that all this data that we collect doesn't mean anything unless I have insight. In other words, I can take data into actionable intelligence, or I can take an action on it. In order to do that, we have all these ways in which data scientists and others have to be able to take that data and apply intelligence to make it real. Well, unfortunately, what happens is 90% of a data scientist's time is spent wrangling with data rather than building the actual data science model. And so if you think about an example of which I have a simple request, I just want to know what is the temperature coming out of all of my particular machines that are on the floor. What's the temperature they're operating in, right? Okay. The problem is, if you look at a plant environment or mini environments, what happens is you have a temperature sensor, and that temperature sensor may be in Celsius, 3 or 4 decimal points. Another one is in Fahrenheit, 2 decimal points. Another one is in Celsius plus geolocation information, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. So you have a multitude of sensors. All of these sensors collect temperature in their own way. They then send it to a server in the cloud. You, as a consumer of that information, have to log into that server, typically, that service, and then request that information. So I got multitude of sensors. I'm logging into a multitude of different servers to get that information. Then once I get it, I got to normalize it. Wow, what a mess. And then what happens is each one of these servers, each one of these players, now I'm talking and they say, oh, you know what? I actually could help you if you gave me temperature information along with speed. And so you go, well, where is speed? Well, speed is actually captured from another provider, but one's in miles per hour, one's in kilometers, one's to the 10 decimal place. So now you got to arrange to get that data, go that way. You end up with this spider mess. One of the things that edge compute can solve for you is its ability to apply a common data architecture. Think of it this way. It means that I can always determine in my business that when I say temperature or when I say speed, it is always in this expressed in Fahrenheit 2 decimal places, or speed is always in miles per hour 1 decimal place. Whatever it is, it allows me to apply that rule right at the device's edge. And now I have, by applying by automatic policy, I can simply say, using edge compute, send my temperature information to here, send it there, send it here, wherever it may be, and know that that temperature information can be used in its current format and analyzed in a simple way because I have implemented a common data architecture across all of my assets. So, hugely transformative. If you want to move from data to insight, you got to be able to structure that data. And the further you structure that data from the source, meaning the further it gets from the source and you want to try to add and manipulate and filter data, it takes exponentially longer and exponentially more costly. So I would tell you right now, the transformative power from a technical perspective around edge computing is our ability to apply a common data architecture. Okay, let's talk about the business implications for edge compute. When you think about the world that we live in and how complex it is all about understanding context. The reason we have sensors and the reason we connect all these things to the world is because it allows us to understand the context of what's happening. Because context will dramatically change the decisions that we make. So whether we're talking about context in a consumer example, right, where you are maybe you're going to a retail store, you're going into an environment, and you know what, you're pushing that cart 5 or 10% faster than everyone else. We know it because of the speed at which you're moving. Now is not the time to hit you up with a bunch of ads because we know you're in a rush. We know that you are struggling and trying to get out of that situation. You want you to get you from point A to point B quickly. Why do we know that? Because of context. When you think about edge computing, the business value behind edge computing says value increases exponentially as data and decision making moves closer and closer to the customer. I call this the Goodwill effect after my grandfather, Joseph Goodwill, because my grandfather always said, if you want to impact change, you have to do it up close and personal, right? And so when you think about the business aspect of edge computing, what you have to do is you have to think about what decisions am I going to empower the people that are closest to the work to be able to make and do so that they can take advantage of the edge compute. They can take advantage of that context that is happening so locally. In other words, if I don't change my business processes, if I don't change how my people operate and the decisions that they're able to make, I can't get any value from edge compute. It's all about empowering and moving data and decision making as close as you can to the customer. So there's edge compute for you. We talked about two things. We talked about the ability for edge compute to drive value from a technical perspective, right? We talked about saving cost. We talked about the importance of being able to make decisions and provide better safety. And then we talked about the transformative nature of edge compute by applying a common data architecture. Then we shifted the conversation around, well, what does it mean from a business perspective? And we talked about that in order to take advantage of edge computing, the ability to understand context at the point of sale, I have to be willing to move data and decision making as close as I can to the customer by being very, very clear on what I expect my employees, what decisions I expect my employees to make, and how I'm going to empower them to make it. It goes back to that old Ritz-Carlton rule, right? Where the Ritz-Carlton literally said anyone in my organization has the ability to spend up to $1,500 to make a customer happy. The reality is they spent a lot less than that in many cases. But the point is that they understood back then where they couldn't really measure context. They understood back then that the context in which an event is happening can greatly determine and impact the proper decision to make. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.